Welcome to the Folktale Project. This is Dan Scholz. Today we have my favorite type of story. Well, actually, we have part one of my favorite types of stories. And this tale, I love it so much because it takes a historical figure, one whose death we think we know quite well because, well, it's been a part of history forever, and imagines a different death, one that is at once more beautiful and much more melancholy. This is part one of Knight Roland. The Emperor Charlemagne was surrounded by a circle of proud knights, the flower of whom was Count Roland of Angiers, nephew of the King of the Franks. The name of no knight was so famous in battle and in tournaments as his. Helpless innocency adored him, his friends admired him, and his enemies esteemed him. His chivalrous spirit had no love for the luxuries of life, and scorning to remain inactive at the emperor's court, he went to his imperial uncle, begging leave to go and travel in those countries of the mighty kingdom of the Franks, which, up to that time, were unknown to him. In his youthful fervor he longed for adventures and dangers. The emperor was much grieved to part with the brave knight, however he willingly complied with the request. One day, early in the morning, the gallant hero left his uncle's palace near the Seine and rode towards the Vosges mountains, accompanied by his faithful squire. The first object of his journey was Castle Nideck, near Haslach, and from there he visited Attic, Duke of Alsace. He continued his travels, and one evening as he was riding through the mountains, the glittering waters of the Rhine, washing both sides of the plain, greeted him. The river in that part of the country offered him few charms in its savage wildness, but he knew that the scenery would soon change. He moved on down the Rhine to where a gigantic mountain shuts the rushing current into a narrow space. Its foot stands chained in the floods, which only in places retire a little, thus leaving the poor folk a narrow stretch of land. On the heights there were proud castles, telling the wanderer below of the fame of their illustrious races. Thus Roland made many a long journey on his adventurous course down the Rhine. He passed many a place rich in old memories, the Lorelei Rock, where the water nymphs sang at night, the cheerful little spot where Saint Goar lived and worked at the time of Childebert, the Merovingian, that wonderful saint who once spread a fog over his imperial uncle, compelling him to pass the night in the open air because His Majesty, while journeying from Ingelheim to Koblenz, had neglected to bend his knee in his chapel. And the green meadows near Andernach, where Jennifer, wife of the Palatine Count Siegfried, lived. And now Roland neared the place where the stream reaches the end of the Rhine valley, and where the 7 giants are to be seen, the summit of one which is crowned with a castle. There they stand like the 7 knights who in later times stood weeping around the holy remains of the German emperor. A wooded island lay in the deep blue waters. The setting sun threw a golden light over the hills. On the sides of the mountains there were numberless vineyards, to the left hedges of beeches ascending to the heights of the rugged summits, to the right the murmur of rippling waters, and above, visible among the legendary rocks where once a terrible beast lived, the pinnacles of a knight's castle, and, over all, the heavens clothed with a garment of silver stars. The knight looked in silence. His glance rested admiringly on the beautiful picture. His steed pawed the ground uneasily with its bronze-shod hoofs, and his faithful squire looked anxiously at the darkening sky. He reminded his master modestly that it was time to seek shelter for the night. "I should like to beg for it up there," said Roland dreamingly, with an inexplicable feeling of sweet sadness coming over him for the first time. He bade his squire ask the boatman who was putting out his little bark to cross the river what was the name of the castle. The castle was the Drachenberg, where Count Heribert sojourned sometimes. Thus ran the answer which pleased Roland very much. He had been charged with many greetings and messages to the old Count at Drachenberg from his friends living near the upper Rhine. Roland now hesitated no longer, and soon a boat was ploughing the dark waves. In the meantime, night had come on. The full moon's soft beams showed them their way through the dark forest. Count Heribert, a worthy knight in the flower of his age, bade the nephew of his imperial master heartily welcome to his castle. Far past midnight they stayed in the count's chambers, engaged in entertaining conversation. The next day Count Heribert presented his daughter Hildegund to the knight. Roland's eyes, full of admiration, rested on the blushing young maiden. Never before had the charms of a woman awakened any deep feeling in his heart. He had only thirsted after glory and deeds of daring, after tournaments and feuds. Now, the bold champion was struck with a shaft from the quiver of love. He who had opposed the dreaded adversary so often, now bowed his fearless head in almost girlish confusion before Hildegund's charms. She, too, stood crimsoning deeply before the celebrated hero, whose name was famous and who was beloved in all the country round. The old knight broke up the scene of embarrassing silence between the youthful couple with gay laughing words, and conducted his guest through the high halls of the castle. Roland tarried longer at the friendly castle than he had ever done before in any other place in the country. He seemed bound to the blissful spot by love's indissoluble chains, and so it happened that one day these two found themselves, hand in hand, the deep love in their hearts rushing forth in ardent words. Count Heribert bestowed his lovely daughter very willingly on the celebrated knight, his only desire being to complete the happiness of his child whom he loved so dearly. A castle should be erected for her on the heights of the rocks on the other side of the Rhine, opposite the Drachenberg, and this proud fort on the rugged rocky corner of the mountain should be a watchtower for the glorious 7 maidens and their castle. In later times, it became the famous Rolandseck. Soon the walls could be seen raising themselves up, and every day the lovers stood on the balcony of the Drachenberg looking across where industrious workmen and masons were busily toiling. Hildegund began to weave sweet dreams of the future found in her new home, where she meant to chain the adventurous hero with true love. But one day a messenger appeared at the Drachenberg on a horse white with foam. He was sent by Charlemagne, and brought the tidings of a crusade which the emperor had decreed against the infidels beyond the Pyrenees. Charlemagne desired to have the famous knight among the leaders of his army. Roland received the message of his great master in silence. He looked at Hildegund, who with a death-like face was standing beside him. Grief stabbed cruelly at his heart. But he must obey the call of honor and duty, and, informing the royal messenger that he would arrive at the imperial camp in 3 days, he turned sorrowfully away, Hildegund sobbing at his side. And that is the first part of the story of Knight Roland. It's a very familiar tale, both historically and in this series, Legends of the Rhine, where love is being interrupted by a crusade. This is Dan Scholz with the Folktale Project. Don't forget that you can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, Overcast, anywhere you like to get your podcasts. You can follow us on Twitter at Folktale Project. You can find us on Auto Radio, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, Spotify, anywhere you like to listen. And you can always head over to folktaleproject.com, where you'll find a new story waiting for you every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. As always, thank you so much for listening.